Before we start, a quick note about what this channel is and what it isn't. This isn't a recap channel, and it's not a highlight reel. We're here for the parts of Panem that happen after the cameras turn away, the systems behind the games, the contracts hidden inside victory, the lives that keep unfolding long after the anthem ends. Each video on this channel is built to slow things down, to follow the logic the Capitol relies on, the details it hopes you won't connect, and the people who live with the consequences year after year. If that's the kind of Hunger Games analysis you're looking for, you're in the right place. Subscribing just means you'll keep a seat here when we move on to the next story. Now, let's start where Panem always wants you to stop paying attention. You remember the shot? President Snow on live TV, the whole Capitol holding its breath, every district forced to watch. An old wooden box, a single envelope. He unfolds the third Quarter Quell card and reads it out like an ancient prophecy no one is allowed to question. At face value, it feels untouchable. These are the sacred rules written decades ago, locked away before Katniss was even born. That's the story you're supposed to accept without blinking. But here's the real question. Were we watching a tradition or a forgery? Was Snow honoring history or quietly loading a gun and pointing it at one girl with a Mockingjay pin? Because the Capitol keeps repeating the same comforting script. Every 25 years, a special Quell, each twist recorded long ago, sealed in a box, waiting for the right president to open it. There is a lot to uncover here, but start with the simplest detail. On screen, you only ever see one person handle that card. Snow. No archivist, no impartial official, no camera close-up of the text before he reads. Just a man with a political problem, holding a piece of paper that magically solves it. Back then, right after the 74th Games, Snow's problem is Katniss. She's the victor who wasn't supposed to be a symbol. Her berries stunt turns the games from pure terror into something dangerous. Hope. He even tells her outright that unrest in the districts is her fault. So why does the 75th twist just happen to be the one scenario that drags her back into the arena, legally, publicly, with the Capitol's full approval? We're going to cover the arena design and the rebellion plans later, but this is where we talk about intent. If the Quell is really about honoring the past, why does this particular long-planned rule target the newest, most troublesome victor? Why not a punishment aimed at districts that misbehaved decades ago? Why not a twist that hits Tesserae users, or career tributes, or mentors? Instead, the rule narrows the pool to victors only. In most districts, that means a shockingly small list of names. In District 12, it means the Capitol can point to the card, shrug, and say our hands are tied. It has to be Katniss. That part matters because it lets Snow turn a personal vendetta into a supposed act of impartial justice. So here's the central question we're chasing in this video. Was the Quarter Quell a random piece of law, or a weaponized system engineered around Katniss's existence, her fears, and her symbolic power? If the card is a lie, then the entire relationship between the games, the victors, and the rebellion timeline shifts. And if Snow could rewrite history on a single card, what else about the games was never real to begin with? From victory to target. Why Katniss couldn't just go home? If the games card might be a lie, then Katniss's biggest mistake is obvious. She thought the train ride home was the end of the story. At face value, Victor's Village is the happy epilogue. You survive the arena, you get a mansion on a hill. Your mother never has to take Tesserae again. The Capitol wants you, and you to believe that's the promise. Endure the horror, then live in safety, forever exempt from the reaping. But here's the real question. What happens when your victory doesn't calm the districts? It ignites them. Katniss walks into that house in District 12, expecting distance from the games. Warm water, Full cupboards, locked doors. Instead, she's walking into a spotlight. Her double victory with Peter didn't just bend the rules, it broadcast a new script to every district kid watching. The capital can be forced to yield. That part matters because Snow doesn't just see a traumatized teenager. He sees a living glitch in the system he's been fine-tuning for decades. So this is where we talk about Snow's political problem after the 74th Games. He can't just have a peacekeeper put a bullet in Katniss behind the bakery. If she mysteriously dies, the message is worse than her living. The capital is scared of one girl with a bow. You don't want a martyr whose death is a yes or no question. You want a spectacle where her meaning dies before her body does. We're going to cover the unrest that proves why he's cornered. By the time Snow shows up in her study, smelling of blood and roses, there are copycat uprisings in multiple districts. People are saluting her on the big screens. A man is shot in front of her in District 11 for honoring her. Snow explicitly blames her for this. And notice what he tries first. The usual tools. Peacekeepers. Whippings. Public executions. None of it works the way it used to, because the problem isn't just fear anymore. It's hope. So why not just tighten the screws harder? Why restage the game so soon, and not with fresh tributes, but with victors? Why risk enraging every district by threatening the only people who've earned their way out? And why is Snow, who normally rules by decree, suddenly hiding behind the supposed authority of a 75-year-old card no one has ever seen before? He reads it on TV. There is a lot to uncover here. The third Quarter Quell has to solve two problems at once: remove Katniss physically and erase what she represents. A random assassination only feeds the legend. A special edition Games, framed as ancient lore, promises something more elegant. Turn her victory into a fluke, her defiance into a death sentence, and remind every district that even a victor is still property. For Katniss, that's the real twist. Winning the Games wasn't the end, it was the opening move in a much bigger arena, one where every district square is now part of the board. And when the capital decides to drag all the victors back in, the question isn't just whether she'll survive again, it's whether the arena they've built around her is secretly designed to break her or the system itself. Our theory in one sentence: the Quarter Quell as a custom execution. The third Quarter Quell isn't a neutral tradition spinning out on autopilot. It's a custom-built execution device retrofitted by Snow so the games themselves can legally, publicly erase Katniss Everdeen. At face value, the Quells are supposed to be ancient. Every 25 years, the Capitol reveals a card that was allegedly written at the very start of the games, each one adding a special twist to remind the districts why they were punished. Sounds fixed, untouchable, almost sacred. But here's the real question. If everything was decided 75 years ago, why does this one twist line up so perfectly with one girl who didn't even exist yet? This is where we talk about angle. For the rest of this video, we're going to cover the Quarter Quell not as a random plot escalation, but as political technology. Every piece of it becomes a tool: the wording on the card, the timing after the 74th Games, the arena design, the propaganda framing. None of that is neutral. All of it is aimed at one problem Snow can't solve with a quiet accident in District 12. Snow's problem is that Katniss is already a victor, already a symbol, and already the source of unrest he personally blames her for. If she vanishes in a mind collapse, the districts get a martyr. If he executes her outright, he proves the game's promise was a lie. He needs her death to look fair, inevitable, and televised. The Quell gives him a loophole. He doesn't kill her. The games do. Now, outside the story, we know Suzanne Collins is escalating the narrative. She needs higher stakes, returning victors. A bigger arena, that part matters because it's easy to stop there and say, well, it's just a sequel hook. But inside Panem, Snow is the one who has to sign off on a twist that reaps from existing victors. In the 1 year when there happens to be a teenage girl whose romance stunt humiliated him in front of every district, so our lens is this. The 75th Games are a tug of war between two sets of designers. On one side, Snow and a capital apparatus trying to turn the arena into a public death sentence that discredits the Mockingjay. On the other, Plutarch and the rebels quietly rewiring that same system into an extraction mission, trying to steal Katniss out from under the president on his own stage. There is a lot to uncover here. The suspiciously convenient wording of the card, the way the clock arena's horrors, water, jabberjays, the lightning tree, map onto Katniss's specific fears, skills, and relationships. The propaganda rollout that tries to turn every returning victor into proof that no one is bigger than the games. If this really is a custom execution, then every design choice is evidence. So next we're going to pull apart the ancient card itself and ask the question Snow never wants the districts to think about: who actually wrote Katniss's death sentence? And when? What we're unpacking today: cards, arenas, and a rigged tradition. So to untangle that, we need a roadmap. Because the Quarter Quell isn't just one decision. It's a stack of choices: the card, the arena, and the power struggle behind both. First, we're going to cover the official story. The Capitol tells you each Quarter Quell twist was written decades ago, sealed on a card and passed down from president to president like some sacred promise. At face value, that sounds ancient and inevitable. Of course, the third Quarter Quell would just happen to target existing victors. But here's the real question. If this was locked in 75 years ago, why does Snow look so tense unveiling it? And why does the wording only become terrifying once Katniss exists? In that first act, we'll walk through all three Quells, how they're supposed to work, and what precedent they set. Then, we'll zoom in on the 75th's exact language and timing. Who benefits from narrowing the pool to victors right after a teenage girl from a starving district outsmarts the games on live TV? That part matters because if the tradition is rigged at the card level, then the entire ancient ritual is really just Snow forging history in real time. From there, we move into the arena itself. This is where we talk about design as intent. The clock layout, the segmented horrors, the way the cornucopia sits on an island with limited water, none of that is neutral. We'll break down how the Jabberjay sector weaponizes Katniss's specific trauma, how the lightning tree schedules danger in a way that rewards people who can climb and shoot, and how the scarcity of fresh water undercuts one of her core survival skills from District 12. Every hour is a new nightmare, but whose nightmares are they really? Then, in Act 3, we go backstage. On one side, you have Snow using the games as a televised execution chamber, trying to kill Katniss in a way that discredits her and reasserts control over every victor watching. On the other, you have Plutarch Heavensby quietly working with the rebellion, turning that same arena into an extraction mission. We'll track the tug-of-war between kill the symbol and steal the symbol, and ask why the relationship between Snow and his own head game maker fractures so fast. After that, we'll get speculative. What would the 75th Quell look like if Katniss never volunteered? Would it still target victors, or would the Capitol invent a different horror to keep the districts in their place? We'll sketch a few alternate timelines to see which pieces feel universal Capitol cruelty and which feel custom-built for one girl with a Mockingjay pin. And finally, we'll pull in the adaptations. The movies change the announcement, the arena visuals, even small character beats. Do those choices accidentally support the idea of a bespoke death trap, or soften it? There is a lot to uncover here, and by the end, The question won't just be whether the Quell was designed to kill Katniss, but whether the story itself keeps hinting that it was. Why this channel obsessively overthinks Panem. So if the story itself is hinting that the Quell was custom built for Katniss, where does that leave us? It leaves us in our favorite place, the Victor's Village of Analysis, comfortable enough to obsess over the games in microscopic detail, but never far from the trauma that built this world in the first place. If you're new here, this is where we talk about the quiet machinery under the spectacle, the contracts hidden inside every reward, the fine print under every promise of hope. At face value, this channel covers Hunger Games content. But here's the real question. Why stop at this scene was cool when you can ask why the Capitol wrote the scene that way in universe? We're going to cover the politics behind Snow's decisions, the relationship between arena design and district control, and the psychology of a victor who realizes the games never actually end. So when we say we do deep dive, lore-heavy, slightly unhinged breakdowns, that's not a joke. That part matters because Panem is built to feel simple on the surface. Televised murder, clear villain, tragic love story. But pull one thread, volunteering rules, tesserae, the wording on a Quarter Quell card, and suddenly you're staring at 100 years of propaganda engineering. There is a lot to uncover here, and we're very comfortable getting lost in those tunnels. This video is exactly that. On paper, the third Quarter Quell is just a spicy anniversary twist. Victors go back into the arena. In practice, it is the Capitol's most sophisticated piece of narrative engineering. It's a public trial, a purge of inconvenient victors, and a test of whether one girl from District 12 can be turned from symbol of defiance into cautionary tale. We're treating the Quell the way a head game maker would treat an arena map. Every mutt, every rule, every camera angle has a reason. If you enjoy having your favorite scenes recontextualized until they feel like brand new horror, this is your arena. You don't have to do anything right now. Just stick around, see if your brain starts rearranging Catching Fire on its own. If by the end of this you're side-eyeing every tradition the Capitol mentions, you're exactly the kind of victor in training this channel is built for. Because here's where we're going next. The Capitol swears these Quarter Quell twists were written decades in advance, sealed away, untouchable. So we're going to rewind all the way to the very first Quell and ask the question Snow does not want you asking. Did this tradition ever exist the way he claims? Or was the whole thing a retrofitted lie built for Katniss Everdeen? To answer that, we have to go back 75 years, rewinding the tape. What the Capitol says the Quarter Quells are. 75 years back, before Katniss, before the Mockingjay, the Capitol gives you this neat little story. Every 25 years, the games don't just repeat. They level up into something historic. A Quarter Quell. At face value, it's not about a new execution method. It's about a lesson. This is where we talk about the official script. The Capitol claims that when the very first Hunger Games were created, the founders wrote out special commemorative twists on separate cards, each one sealed in a locked box, each one tied to some moral from the dark days that the districts are never allowed to forget. Every 25 years, the president just opens the box, pulls the next card, and reads whatever horror the ancestors supposedly picked. We're going to cover what those horrors actually were, because there is a lot to uncover here. The 25th Games, the first Quarter Quell, supposedly reminded the districts that their rebellion cost countless lives. So the twist doubled the number of tributes. Not 2 from each district, 4. Twice the blood, twice the lesson, sold as a grim anniversary special rather than the Capitol getting bored and wanting a bigger body count. Then you have the 50th Games, Haymitch's year. The Capitol frames this Quell as a reminder that the districts were the ones who reaped war on Panem, so they must reap twice as hard. The twist? Each district has its name drawn twice. Double reaping, double tributes again, but with a different justification, a different story about why the punishment is necessary. The reason matters because it keeps the relationship between tradition and cruelty looking thoughtful instead of random. By the time we reach the 75th, the capital insists the pattern still holds. This card, they say, was written decades ago to remind victors that their privileges exist only because of the games. So the twist reaps from existing victors. No more promise that winning means you, personally, are done. The capital can reach back into your life at any time and pull you out. Notice how ritualized the reveal is. The president walks on stage, the cameras lock in, and a ceremonial box is brought out. It's locked, it's old, it's heavy. Snow unlocks it, reaches in, and pulls a single card. He reads the text as if it's sacred law. Not his idea, not a policy decision, just history speaking through him. That part matters because it lets him escalate the games while pretending he has no choice. Here's the real question. If this ritual is so sacred and fixed, why is there no independent verification? No archivists cataloguing the box, no live feed on it year-round, no one from the districts allowed to inspect the cards. No one but the president ever touches them. For a tradition the capital swears is unchangeable, it's suspiciously easy to fake. So the next problem we have to tackle is obvious. What happens when that box stops being a prop and becomes a weapon aimed at one specific victor? No. Before Katniss, a president in search of stronger chains. That weapon doesn't appear out of nowhere. To understand how the Quarter Quell becomes a sniper shot at one girl from District 12, you have to rewind to a different arena entirely. Decades before Katniss, before Mockingjay pins and berries, there's a starving student named Coriolanus Snow, watching the 10th Hunger Games fall apart in his hands. Back then the games are messy, barely controlled, closer to a public execution than a polished show. Tributes sit in a zoo, sponsors are an experiment. The capital is still rebuilding for more. And Snow watches something terrifying happen. The audience gets bored, the tributes resist the script, and control starts to slip. That part matters because it's his first real lesson that power isn't guaranteed just because you say you have it. You see him gaming scholarship systems, manipulating classmates, bending arbitrary rules to survive. Already he understands the relationship between performance and reward. Play the role they want, you get food. Refuse, you starve. Here's the real question. What does a person who grows up inside that bargain do when he finally has the presidency and the games themselves as tools? By the time Snow is president, he's evolved from scrabbling student to long-term strategist. Fear is still his favorite instrument, but he's learned it can't work alone. If the games are only horror, districts revolt. If they're only spectacle, capital citizens stop believing they're necessary. So he threads a needle. Every reaping is a punishment, every victory a promise. You could die, but you could also win. Your district could get food. Your family could move to a better house. A little hope, weaponized. This is where we talk about reinvention. The games can't stay static for 75 years without rotting from the inside. So Snow leans into novelty, new arenas, new mutts, new pageantry. At face value, that's just for ratings. But there is a lot to uncover here, because each twist is also a political test. How far can he push? How much can he take before the system cracks? Enter the Quarter Quells. Officially, they're solemn commemorations, pre-written decades in advance. In practice, they're Snow's built-in excuse to periodically raise the stakes and reset the psychological contract with the districts. Every 25 years, he gets a blank check. He can change the rules, discover a card, and frame it as unbreakable tradition instead of personal choice. The first Quell forces districts to choose which of their own to send. The second doubles the tributes. Each one is a lab experiment in obedience. Does forcing complicity deepen guilt? Does more blood strengthen fear? Snow is watching the response in every district square, tracking how much outrage he can safely convert into resignation. So by the time Katniss ever picks up a bow, Snow has decades of practice using spectacle as camouflage. He knows how to hide cruelty inside ceremony, how to sell escalation as remembrance, how to make the Capitol cheer for decisions that quietly tighten the chains on every victor and every district. Which raises the next question. When rebellion finally sparks around a single girl with a handful of berries, what does a man with that history do with his most flexible tradition? The first and second Quells, tradition or convenient retroactive justification. So when Snow reaches for the Quarter Quell, he's not pulling out a neutral tradition. He's reaching into a magic box the Capitol swears was sealed decades ago. At face value, that sounds impressive. Ancient cards, pre-written punishments, history itself deciding how the games escalate every 25 years. But here's the real question. When you actually look at the first and second Quells, do they feel like destiny or convenient excuses dressed up as ceremony? This is where we talk about the 25th, the very first Quarter Quell, the Capitol's big anniversary statement. The rule was simple. Instead of 2 tributes per district, they send 4, twice the blood, twice the funerals, supposedly as a reminder of the rebellion's cost. You can sell that message in any era. Year 2500, 200. It doesn't matter. You made us suffer, now you suffer more is the most generic authoritarian script in the book. And that part matters because it's so plug and play. There is a lot to uncover here. If those cards were truly written at the start, someone somehow predicted that, on year 25, the best possible lesson would just be more kids. No specific political situation. No tailored response to unrest. Just a safe, evergreen justification you could slap on any games where ratings dipped or the Capitol wanted extra spectacle. Then you hit the 50th Quell and the pattern gets even more suspicious. The twist this time? Double reaping. 2 boys and 2 girls from each district, again framed as punishment for the dark days. Notice the repetition. The reason is still the same rebellion that ended decades ago, but now it conveniently creates maximum trauma in a very different media landscape. By year 50, the games are an institution. The Capitol audience has seen kids kill each other for half a century. So why the change? Suddenly, the Quell tradition demands a huge escalation that just happens to refresh the format, reset the stakes, and give the Capitol a bloodier highlight reel. Haymitch's arena, with its rigged force field and brutal casualty rate, becomes a ratings event and a political warning in one package. But how do we know any of this was actually planned from day one? We don't. Everything we know about those cards comes from Capitol-controlled broadcasts, Snow's solemn little keybox, and a story they repeat often enough that you stop questioning it. There's no independent record, no district archive, just a president holding a piece of paper on live TV and telling you, history says this must happen. So what if the lessons come second and the escalation comes first? The Capitol decides what it wants to do. Double tributes, double reapings, victors only, and then retrofits a moral to justify it. The card isn't proof, it's a prop. A way to turn raw power into something that feels inevitable, almost sacred. And if that's true for the 25th and 50th, it opens a very dangerous door. If Snow can rewrite the meaning of a quell whenever it suits him, what exactly stops him, 75 years in, from tailoring an entire tradition around one particular victor from District 12? Because once Katniss walks out of that arena with a handful of berries, and the districts start to whisper, the next card he reads doesn't just have to escalate the games. it has to erase her. Or at least, that's what Snow thinks he's doing. The wording that changed everything, dissecting the third Quarter Quell card. So when that shiny white card comes out on live television, you're not just watching a tradition, you're watching a loaded weapon. Snow reads the key line, "For the third Quarter Quell, the tributes will be reaped from the existing pool of victors." At face value, it sounds ceremonial, almost poetic. Draw from the champions, make the games historic. But here's the real question. Why that pool? Why that wording at that exact moment after that exact girl from District 12 just turned a double suicide into a symbol of hope? Because the existing pool of victors is tiny. It's not millions of citizens, it's a curated list of people the capital already owns on paper. And in District 12, that list is microscopic. Haymitch, Peter, Katniss. That's it. No mystery, no suspense. The law of the game suddenly becomes math, and the math points one male, one female. District 12 only has one female victor, which means there is no reaping in any meaningful sense. There is only Katniss. The moment Snow reads that card, every viewer in Panem who can count to 3 knows she is going back in. That part matters because it exposes how narrow this random tradition really is. It's a rule written with a single name already glowing underneath. Now, compare that to all the other lessons this Quell could have delivered. It could have demanded the mentors be reaped. That would punish victors, sure, but it wouldn't guarantee Katniss specifically. It could have pulled in siblings of past tributes, or even capital citizens to share the burden of the games. Horrifying, yes, but it would spread the terror around instead of laser focusing it on one teenage girl with a Mockingjay pin. Even if they'd said reap from each district's entire adult population, Katniss would just be one name in a giant bowl. Still at risk, but not inevitable. Instead, the wording slices straight down. Only victors, only those already marked by the arena, only those the capital has files on, cameras on, and then Snow does something very specific on air. He keeps stressing that by law, they must obey the card. He treats the wording as this sacred, untouchable mandate. That's his shield. He's not killing Katniss. The founders of Panem are. He's just the unfortunate president forced to send the Mockingjay back into the fire. There is a lot to uncover here, because that performance does 2 things at once. It weaponizes the Quell against a single victor, and it hides behind ceremony to pretend his hands are clean. The precision of that phrase, combined with the timing immediately after her rebellion-sparking victory, is our first major clue that this Quell wasn't neutral at all. This is where we talk about intent versus accident. Was Snow just incredibly lucky that a 75-year-old card happened to target Katniss so perfectly, or did someone quietly swap the script? Forgery, swap, or selection? How could Snow rig a sacred card? So if this wasn't an innocent coincidence, how do you actually rig something that's supposedly been waiting in a box for 75 years? At face value, the Quarter Quell system is untouchable. Sealed card, ancient ink, solemn president. But here's the real question. Who ever verifies any of that? We're going to cover 3 basic options for how Snow could pull this off without shattering the illusion of tradition. The card was forged outright. An original was quietly swapped, or there were always multiple sacred cards, and Snow simply picked the one that solved his Katniss problem. Start with straight forgery. The story is that these cards were written by the original lawmakers, locked away, and only opened on camera by the sitting president. Sounds impressive. But that part matters because it also means there is no independent witness, no historian in the room, no archivist from some neutral district. You only ever see one thing, Snow, the box, and a performance. If the capital can fabricate mutts and entire games arenas, they can forge parchment and handwriting. The only proof is Snow's word, and his word is already compromised the second he walks into Katniss's house and threatens her family. Option 2 is the swap. Imagine there really was an old third Quell card, something more generic about doubling tributes or changing the training rules. It sits in that box for decades. Then the 74th games happen, a girl with a bow forces a double victory, and suddenly Snow needs a surgical response. There is a lot to uncover here in terms of risk. He'd have to access a supposedly sacred object, maybe bribe or eliminate whoever maintains the vault, and then trust that no one remembers the original text. But again, who would? The only people with direct knowledge are dead presidents and loyal staff. In a system built on fear, I think the card was different is not a survivable complaint. The third option might be the most elegant. There were never single cards at all. There were sets. Multiple sealed contingencies for each Quell, all written in advance to preserve that aura of age, but giving each president a menu of cruelty. This is where we talk about political flexibility. Snow can stand there, hand on the box, and tell the districts he is bound by the wisdom of the founders, while in reality, he's chosen the one clause that narrows the reaping pool to victors and drags Katniss back into the games on a technicality. Why take that risk? Because from his perspective, there is no risk. The districts have no access to the archive. The capital audience has no reason to question the ritual. The relationship between president and card is completely opaque. If the Mockingjay is undermining the promise that the games are controllable, he'll quietly break tradition to erase her, then use the same tradition to justify it. Which raises a darker question. If he was willing to rig the rule that got her into the arena, how much of the arena was also engineered to break Katniss Everdeen specifically? Not just any victor unlucky enough to be reaped. Snow's real goal, not just killing Katniss, but discrediting the Mockingjay. So if the arena itself is tailored to Katniss, why doesn't Snow just have a mutt trip in her kitchen and be done with it? Why go through the trouble of a whole Quarter Quell? Because a quiet death solves his problem on paper, but explodes it everywhere else. At this point in the story, Katniss isn't just a girl from District 12. She's the victor who forced the Capitol to break its own rules on live television. She's proof that the games can be hacked. If she suddenly dies in an accident, what does every district think? That the Capitol got scared, that their fear of one girl was justified. You don't erase a symbol by confirming all the rumors around it. Here's the real question. What kind of death would actually protect Snow's power instead of undermining it? It has to feel fair, legal, inevitable. And that's exactly what the third Quarter Quell gives him. At face value, it's not, "We're killing Katniss Everdeen." It's the ancient card says all existing victors must return. She isn't being hunted, she's being selected by history. That part matters because it lets Snow hide behind tradition. When Effie reads Katniss's name, the Capitol audience can sigh, maybe even cry, but then shrug. The rules are the rules. If she dies in the arena, it's not murder, it's just the games doing what they always do. Another tribute who couldn't beat the system twice. And this is where we talk about propaganda. Snow doesn't just want Katniss dead, he wants her discredited. The 74th games ended on a love story that beat the rules, so the 75th has to prove that was a fluke. If Katniss dies on camera, Snow can spin it as proof that romance doesn't save you, that hope based on one clever stunt is childish. Remember how Caesar Flickerman and the commentators frame everything as narrative. Imagine the line, "Even our beloved star-crossed lovers can't escape the justice of the Quell." But notice how reaping from the pool of victors drags every other symbol back into the bloodbath. Finnick, adored by the Capitol. Joanna, openly hostile. Beatty, the mind who can outthink the arena. By forcing them all in at once, Snow dilutes Katniss's unique status. If any of them breaks, begs, or dies messily on camera, the message to the districts is simple. Your heroes are still just pieces. So the Quell becomes a televised execution with plausible deniability. Snow isn't only aiming at Katniss's body, he's aiming at the idea of the Mockingjay as a path to freedom. If he can turn her from girl on fire into girl who lost, the relationship between victors and hope resets in his favor. Or at least, that's the plan. The irony is that the same stage he builds to destroy her image gives the rebels their best chance to steal it. And once you see that, every design choice in that arena starts to look less random. Designing a death trap. Who really built the 75th arena? So if every detail in that arena starts to feel personal, you have to ask, personal to whom? To Snow, who wants a televised execution, or to someone else, quietly building an escape route inside the death trap? This is where we talk about Plutarch Heavensby. On paper, he's the model capital official, new head game maker, smooth, unbothered, joking with Katniss at the party while the game's machinery hums in the background. But here's the real question. Why would a man that smart design an arena that's both brutally lethal and weirdly solvable? The answer lives in that split role he's playing, loyal architect for Snow and secret engineer for the rebel plan to extract the Mockingjay. Plutarch's problem is almost impossible. Snow needs a third Quarter Quell that guarantees Katniss dies on camera in a way that discredits her and scares the districts back into line. Plutarch needs the exact opposite, an arena that can be hacked, literally and metaphorically, to get her out alive without tipping off the capital too early. 2 clients, 1 stage, no second chances. So how do you build an arena that satisfies both? You make it orderly enough that rebels can predict it, but terrifying enough that Snow reads it as creative cruelty. That's where the clock design comes in. At face value, it's a psychological nightmare. Every wedge delivers a new horror on a schedule you only understand once it's already hurt you. It turns the games into a twisted logic puzzle, punishing victors for trying to think their way out. But there is a lot to uncover here when you look at it from the other direction. A clock is also a timetable, a map, a system that runs on precision. If you're a rebel force planning to break the force field at a specific moment, you need predictable patterns, not random chaos. The very thing that makes the arena feel inescapable to the tributes makes it legible to the people waiting outside with a hovercraft. That part matters because the arena isn't just full of dangers, it's full of handles. The lightning tree that strikes at the exact same time every day. The force field that doesn't just kill, but stores and redirects energy. The regular tick of Jabberjay screams. The rising and falling of the poisonous fog. Which of those are pure capital sadism, and which are tools Plutarch quietly installs so BT can turn the whole arena into one giant circuit breaker? So here's the question we're going to cover next. When you go wedge by wedge through that clock, do the horrors line up more with Snow's obsession with Katniss's fears, or with the rebels' need for a clean extraction window? We're going to slow the arena down hour by hour and see whose fingerprints are really on each slice of that spinning trap. The clock of nightmares, why this arena is a clock. The next question is simple. Whose timepiece is it actually set to? At face value, the 75th arena is just a clever gimmick. You've got that perfect circle of jungle, a ring of dense foliage wrapped around a central cornucopia island, all of it sliced into 12 wedges. Each slice is an hour. Each hour, one horror turns on, runs its course, and then resets while the hand of the clock moves to the next nightmare. Blood rain, beast stampedes, tidal waves. It feels fair in that twisted capital way, because everyone is trapped in the same schedule. But here's the real question. Who in that arena is actually wired to obsess over patterns to the point where the pattern itself becomes torture? Katniss has spent 2 games now in permanent hypervigilance. She doesn't sleep, she counts breaths, she catalogues sounds in the trees. In a normal arena, that instinct keeps you alive. In a clock arena, that part matters because the entire design forces her to track, predict, and anticipate every hour, every wedge, every scream. The games turn her greatest survival tool into a 24-hour anxiety engine. There is a lot to uncover here about the jungle itself. On paper, this should be Katniss's comfort zone. She's the forest hunter from a coal district. The girl who can read bark and birdsong the way other people read newspapers. So why give her trees, right? The reason is that these aren't her woods. The air is poisoned fog. The branches hide mutation monkeys. Even the water is a trap that only appears safe because it looks familiar. The capital takes her one reliable relationship to the world, forest equals freedom, trees equal food, and corrupts it into something predatory. This is where we talk about control. Katniss's default strategy is lone wolf. In the first games, her only real alliance is with Rue, and even that is short, fragile, and devastating. But in a timed arena where each wedge has a specific function, no single victor can map it alone. You need someone who's watched the lightning tree, someone who's survived the blood rain, someone who's tested the beach. The clock's complexity forces knowledge sharing. Suddenly, she's stuck with Finnick, Beatty, Johanna, Wyrus, all of them depending on her and making her responsible for more than just her own heartbeat. And emotional stakes are a weapon. If Katniss dies alone, she's a martyr. If she dies surrounded by desperate victors from every district, the capital can frame it as the system devouring itself. The arena design pushes her into relationships Snow can then threaten, exploit. We're going to cover those wedges in detail, because once you zoom in, the pattern gets even sharper. The Jabberjay Hour doesn't just scare tributes, it hijacks Katniss's specific fear of losing her family. The question is, how many of those horrors are coincidence, and how many are custom-built for the Mockingjay? Hold that thought when we step into the Screaming Bird's slice of the clock next. The Jabberjay wedge, weaponizing Prim, Gale, and Katniss's guilt. So when we step into that screaming slice of the clock, you can feel it immediately. This wedge isn't random weather or beasts. It's a custom-built psychological trap. Katniss and Finnick cross the jungle, the Jabberjays swarm in, and suddenly the arena stops being about spears and force fields. It becomes about voices. Not just any voices. Prim, Gale, Annie. The birds seal them in and start replaying those screams on a loop, begging, sobbing, calling their names, as if the people they love are being tortured just out of reach. At face value, it's a horror gimmick. Scary birds, creepy sound design, the capital showing off another sadistic toy. But here's the real question. Why those specific voices, in that specific configuration, with those specific victors? This is where we talk about Katniss's core fear. From page 1 of the story, her entire identity is built on one promise: protect Prim. She volunteers at the reaping because the games threaten that relationship. She hunts so her family doesn't starve. Her deal with Snow in Catching Fire is essentially, I will perform whatever you want if it keeps my family safe. That part matters because the Jabberjay wedge doesn't just scare her. It tells her, in surround sound, that she has failed at the one thing that defines her. The capital weaponizes that history. To get those sounds, they had to record Prim and Gale in advance, isolate their voices, process them, and program them into the arena. That's not a last-minute choice. That's weeks of surveillance, audio capture, and testing built around one tribute's pressure points. You don't bother doing that unless the games are no longer about a fair fight. They're about dismantling the Mockingjay on camera. And notice the pairing. Finnick hears Annie, his own private wound, So we watch two famous victors, two symbols of hope to their districts, reduced to clawing at invisible walls and sobbing into foliage. On broadcast, that's gold for Snow. The message is clear: your heroes are children again, helpless, broken by nothing more than sound. From a propaganda angle, it's perfect. Katniss isn't dying in a blaze of glory. She's collapsing, incoherent, begging BT to tell her if Prim is really safe. The Capitol can replay that footage for every district and say, see? She can't protect anyone. She can't even tell what's real. The rebellion symbol becomes an advertisement for obedience. So if the Capitol is willing to go that far, pre-recording her sister, her best friend, turning her guilt into a weaponized soundtrack, what does that say about every other random horror in the Quell? How many of those clock segments are actually tests of survival? And how many are knives aimed straight at Katniss's mind that we haven't fully recognized yet? Water, lightning, and the force field, turning Katniss's skills against her. So when you drop Katniss Everdeen into that jungle, you'd expect her to thrive, right? Forest, foliage, animals to hunt. It looks like District 12 on Nightmare mode. But here's the real question. Why does an arena that seems tailor-made for a hunter actually strip away almost every advantage she has? This is where we talk about water. In the first games, Katniss's survival hinges on finding hidden streams, reading plants, disappearing into the landscape. In the Quarter Quell, the Capitol takes that entire skill set and twists it. Fresh water isn't scattered and discoverable. It's centralized in a gleaming, perfect ring around the cornucopia. You don't track it. You're herded to it. That part matters because it turns a core survival resource into a spotlight. The beach becomes a stage. If you want to drink, you step into open sand, clear sight lines, 360-degree visibility, no dense underbrush to vanish into, no trees to climb and hide. So instead of Katniss melting into the arena the way she did in the 74th games, the design keeps pulling her back toward the center, toward the cameras, toward the other victors. It's a relationship shift between tribute and terrain. The jungle is no longer her ally. It's a funnel. And once you move off that beach, the environment turns into a minefield of invisible threats. Poison fog you can't smell until it's on you. Jabberjays that weaponize sound instead of sight. Monkey mutts that burst from the trees with no warning. At face value, it's just escalation. Higher stakes, nastier hazards. But the reason it hits Katniss so hard is that it undercuts her specific confidence in reading the wild. She knows tracks, plants, weather. None of that helps when the danger is timed, mechanical, and arbitrary. Then there's the lightning tree. On Snow's side, it's perfect television. A massive, predictable bolt that strikes at the same time every day, threatening anyone foolish enough to be nearby. It's divine punishment built into the sky. But for Plutarch and BT, that predictability is the point. We're going to cover BT's plan more later, but notice how the rebels treat the arena as circuitry, not scenery. The tree isn't just a hazard, it's a power source on a schedule. That loops us straight to the force field. From Snow's perspective, the field is the ultimate control. It pens tributes in, bounces them back, even nearly kills Peter when he walks into it. It's a hard edge saying, you will play where we tell you. Yet the same barrier becomes the literal exit door when Katniss fires her arrow into it. Her archery, normally used to hunt to survive, only matters here because it can complete BT's circuit and blow a hole in the sky. So you get this tug of war baked into the design. Every element that boxes Katniss in, every centralized resource and timed disaster, also creates a fixed pattern the rebels can exploit. The arena is both trap and key, execution chamber and jailbreak blueprint at the same time, which raises an even bigger question. If the environment itself can be turned against the Capitol, What happens when you start looking at the tributes the same way? Victors as pawns. If the arena can be weaponized both ways, what about the tributes who've already survived it once? This is where we talk about victors as pieces on the board, not trophies on a shelf. Any victor will tell you the games don't end when you win. In Panem, victors are the only people in their district who've technically beaten the capital at its own ritual and lived. They get the mansion, the steady food, the so-called freedom from labor. They mentor, they appear on television, they have a direct relationship to the capital's media machine. At face value, they're district heroes, living proof that the promise of the games is real, endure the horror, and you might come home. But here's the real question. Why would a regime obsessed with control create a class of people who've already slipped the noose once? The answer is that victors are never meant to be free. They're meant to be advertisements. Their job is to stand there, shining, and quietly sell the idea that the system works, that the reaping is survivable, that you should keep playing because there is a jackpot. So when the third Quarter Quell suddenly says, actually, we're reaping from the existing pool of victors, that's not just a twist. That's a message. If even the people the capital pretends to reward can be thrown back in, then no one is safe. Not the careers, not the mentors, not the beloved drunk in District 12 who somehow keeps his kids alive. The entire logic of win and you're done collapses on live TV. That part matters because Katniss's whole symbolic power rests on being the exception. The girl who cracked the rules and walked out with 2 victors instead of 1. Snow's problem after the 74th Games isn't just that she's alive, it's that she makes hope feel repeatable. So what does he do? He takes every other winner and drags them in with her. Suddenly, she's not the fairy tale outlier. She's one more doomed victor in a rigged recall program. From your seat in a district square. That's brutal. You grew up watching Finnick, or BT, or Kashmir win. They're the only people you've ever seen beat the arena. Now you're forced to watch them be re-traumatized, injured, or killed, while the capital calls it a celebration of unity. Where does your anger go? Do you aim it at Snow, or do you start resenting the victors for not saving you, for being chosen again when your children still face the reaping? There is a lot to uncover here, because reaping victors doesn't just threaten Katniss's life, it attacks the story that made her dangerous. By turning every victor into expendable cannon fodder, the Quell tries to erase the idea that anyone, even her, is special enough to escape the game's logic. And that sets up the next move in Snow's strategy. If Katniss can't be unique, can she at least be discredited? Finnick, Johanna, Beatty. Allies or extra insurance policies. So if the Quell is meant to prove Katniss isn't special, why fill the arena with the most special people Panem has? This is where we talk about Finnick, Johanna, and Beatty. At face value, they're just more names in a rigged lottery. But look at who they are. Finnick O'Dare, capital heartthrob, war hero in waiting, a victor who can pull ratings just by existing. Johanna Mason, the axe-wielding rebel spirit the capital never quite managed to sand down. Beatty, the mind that turned wire and voltage into a weapon the capital then happily bought. These aren't background tributes. Each one is a brand, a promise, a relationship with the audience that Snow can weaponize. Here's the real question. Why would Snow risk putting 3 high-value victors in the same arena as the girl he supposedly wants to erase? The reason is brutal in its simplicity. If Katniss dies, problem solved. If she lives, he wants someone else to die louder. Finnick's noble sacrifice, Johanna's brutal breakdown, Beatty's failed genius. Any of those stories can be pushed harder in the broadcasts to smother the Mockingjay under another tragedy. You can feel that calculus in how the games are framed. The commentary keeps reminding you of Finnick's past romance rumors, Johanna's infamous strip in the elevator, Beatty's nickname vaults. The Capitol is priming viewers with alternate narratives. If Katniss underperforms, if she freezes, if she refuses to play along, Snow has backup symbols ready to go. There is a lot to uncover here, because the games don't just kill bodies, they edit meaning. And from Katniss's point of view, their presence is a problem. How do you stay the center of a rebellion story when Finnick is rescuing Peeta from the fog, when Johanna is screaming defiance at the sky, when Beatty is literally trying to blow up the force field? Any one of them could outshine her through sacrifice, strategy, or sheer brutality. That part matters, because Snow doesn't need to assassinate her character if he can simply out-headline her. But then you flip the camera, and the whole thing inverts. To Snow, these victors are extra insurance policies. To the rebels, they're bodyguards. Finnick sticks to Katniss almost obsessively. Johanna attacks her in the tree to remove her tracker. Beatty hands her the wire and the lightning plan, trusting her to complete the circuit. We're going to cover this more, but what looks chaotic is actually a ring closing around her, one she doesn't understand and can't control. Snow thinks he's stacked the arena with threats that can overshadow or eliminate her. The rebels have quietly stacked it with assets that can shield and crown her instead. So here's the next question. If the Quell was engineered to kill Katniss, what happens when Plutarch starts using the exact same pieces to make her inevitable? Plutarch's double game, hijacking a rigged Quell. Plutarch's double game really starts in a ballroom. You're at Snow's party with Katniss, drowning in silk and champagne, when this new head game maker casually shows her a watch. He flips the face. For a second, a mockingjay flares across it. Then it's gone. At face value, it's just a weird fashion choice. But here's the real question. Why is the man who designs death for a living wearing the symbol the Capitol fears most on a clock? That part matters because Plutarch isn't just flirting with rebellion aesthetics. He's already thinking in timing, in segments, in rotations. The watch is a miniature arena, a dial that turns, an image that appears only at the right moment. He's basically telling Katniss, pay attention to the hours. She doesn't decode it yet, but we're going to cover how that tiny gesture previews the entire Quell, a clock-shaped arena, a scheduled extraction, and a plan that runs on the same rails Snow thinks he controls. Now, Plutarch has a problem Snow doesn't see. As head game maker, he can't simply refuse the Quell or lose Katniss without suspicion. The Capitol is already paranoid, so he does the only thing a rebel in his position can do. He leans into the job. He oversees arena design, he sits in on tribute placement, he signs off on rule enforcement. Every decision has to look cruel enough to satisfy Snow, but flexible enough to hide a backdoor. So why is the all-victor pool so important here? Snow thinks he's narrowing the field to controllable pieces, people with known weaknesses, existing contracts, and a long relationship with Capitol Media. But the rebels flip that logic. All the dangerous victors, the ones with grudges and combat experience, are suddenly concentrated in one place, with cameras everywhere, with sponsors watching. With Beatty and Wiress, Finnick, Johanna, all within whisper range of Katniss. There is a lot to uncover here, but the core move is simple. Use Snow's own twist to gather your army on live television. This is where we talk about the extraction plan. Because the arena only pretends to be random, Beatty's wire, the lightning tree, and the force field aren't just cool set pieces. They're components. You have a predictable energy source on a schedule, a conductive material that can span multiple sections, and a barrier that just happens to respond dramatically to impact. Why is there a visible weak spot in the sky? Why does Plutarch let Katniss see the force field bounce Peeta back? He's teaching her the rules of the puzzle she'll eventually break. And suddenly, the Quell isn't one story, it's two. Snow believes he's staging a public execution, proving that even a rebellious victor can be dragged back into the games and erased. Plutarch is staging a coronation, using the same arena to blast Katniss out of the sky as the Mockingjay. One battlefield, two narratives, and the question becomes, whose ending does Panem believe when the smoke clears? Because once you realize the games can be hijacked from the inside, you have to ask what else about the Quell might be a performance within a performance. Why allow volunteers at all? The meta question behind the games. So if the Quell might be a performance within a performance, here's the next uncomfortable step. Why keep the performance at all? If your goal is pure terror, why build in any cracks? Why allow volunteers, or Victor's privilege, or the promise of a quiet house in Victor's village? On paper, the Capitol could run the Hunger Games as a factory. Names go in, 2 tributes come out. No substitutions, no rewards. No volunteers stepping forward. No mentoring. No tours, no parades, no talents. Just a yearly conveyor belt of dead children. At face value, that sounds scarier, right? You have 0 chance to game the system. 0 chance to avoid the reaping. But here's the real question. Would that world actually be more stable, or would it burn faster? Because a system that is only a wall eventually teaches you one thing. Walls can be torn down. If the games are nothing but faceless slaughter, you don't get career districts. You don't get parents grooming their kids to be tributes. You don't get people arguing over odds and sponsors and strategies. You just get grief. And then rage. There is a lot to uncover here about why volunteering exists at all. When you're allowed to step forward, even in a place where almost no one does, the games stop being an execution and start to feel like a contest. A twisted contest, sure, but still something you might outsmart, or outfight, or avoid through tesserae math and careful family planning. That part matters because it shifts the relationship between the districts and the arena from we are trapped to maybe, if we're clever or strong enough, we can win. Snow needs that maybe. Controlled outlets for agency are pressure valves. Volunteering, mentoring, Victor's village, even the Quells. They all say the same thing. This is a game with rules. Rules you can study, rules you can exploit, rules that occasionally reward you with food shipments and new houses and a lifetime out of the mines. The prison is still there, but it's sold to you as a game you can theoretically win. Snow can't just throw Katniss off a balcony. That would prove the law is whatever he feels that morning. Instead, he steps on stage with a sealed envelope and a trembling hand and tells you, this twist was written decades ago. It's not his personal vendetta. It's tradition. It's the law. It's the games being the games. By framing even this brutal escalation as by the book, he keeps the narrative of fairness alive, even while he's almost certainly swapped the card to target one specific victor. And that's where his famous line finally clicks into place. Fear keeps the districts in line, but hope keeps them participating. For the Quell to work to kill Katniss and still preserve the system, it has to look legitimate, which raises the next problem for Snow. What happens when the symbol you're trying to erase is also the only source of hope your system can't afford to lose? Hope carefully controlled, the political physics of the Quarter Quell. So how do you kill the Mockingjay without killing the one thing your system runs on? You don't just swing the axe, you adjust the dosage. This is where we talk about Snow's favorite drug, hope. In that balcony scene with Seneca Crane, he spells it out for you and for us. Hope. It is the only thing stronger than fear. A little hope is effective. A lot of hope is dangerous. At face value, it sounds almost generous, right? Give the districts a sliver of possibility and they'll keep watching, keep sending their children, keep obeying. But here's the real question. How do the games turn that line into policy? Any victor will tell you the games are built on a rigged promise. You might die, your district might suffer, but there's a non-zero chance you walk out rich, famous, and safe. That part matters because it reframes terror as a lottery. The capital doesn't just threaten you, it invites you to play. The Quells crank this up. Special rules, special pageantry, special rewards. They say, the system is cruel, but it is also consistent. Every 25 years, the capital honors history by giving you a new, horrible way to maybe win. But the third Quarter Quell quietly flips the equation. Instead of dangling a new hope, it reaches backward and weaponizes old hope. The wording on that card doesn't just reap tributes, it reaps victors. People who already won, who already proved the relationship between obedience and reward. Snow is turning their previous survival into a new sentence. Your victory wasn't a finish line, it was deferred punishment. Why is that so politically useful for Snow? Because on camera, it looks lawful. He isn't dragging Katniss out of her house at gunpoint. He's reading a supposedly ancient rule, sealed in a box in front of the entire nation. The message to the districts isn't, I hate this one girl. It's even she is subject to the games. The system is bigger than any symbol, bigger than any promise. There is a lot to uncover here. If Snow openly targeted Katniss, she becomes a martyr. If the peacekeepers shoot her in the square, every district can tell themselves the contract is broken. But if the Quell forces her back in, then her death is just another tragic outcome of a sacred tradition. A cruel necessity, not a personal vendetta. You can still tell your children the games are brutal, but they are fair. So the Quarter Quell isn't just designed to kill Katniss, it's designed to do it while preserving the illusion that the games are an old, impartial institution. The card, the ceremony, the language about history, all of that is political physics, carefully controlling how much hope leaks out, which leaves one final dangerous question hanging over that little wooden box. What if the rule on the card isn't ancient at all? Capital Propaganda 101, selling a custom execution as sacred tradition. So if that card isn't ancient, you suddenly have a different problem. Not what did the founders decree, but how do you sell a custom execution to an entire country as if it's sacred law? This is where we talk about the broadcast itself. You remember the scene. The cameras pull in on Snow in that immaculate office. The lighting soft, the colors muted, the music almost funereal. It doesn't feel like a policy announcement. It feels like a funeral mass. At face value, the Capitol is just honoring history, opening a wooden box, reading a pre-written rule. But here's the real question. Why does it look and sound closer to a religious ritual than a government decision? There is a lot to uncover here. The ornate card, the slow, reverent way Snow unfolds it, the way the announcers lower their voices. The games were born out of war and punishment, but the Quell broadcast reframes them as something older, purer, almost mystical. That part matters because if you're trying to hide a targeted move against one victor, you don't present it as a debate, you present it as scripture. Listen to Snow's wording. It was written. By law we must honor. He keeps invoking this vague, untouchable past. The relationship he's building isn't Snow versus Katniss, it's Katniss versus history. He's shifting the blame from his personal will to the supposed will of time itself. If the rule was written long ago, then he's just the messenger, right? Just a sad old man delivering bad news the founders already decided. So how does that land in the Capitol? You can imagine two main audiences. There are citizens who are genuinely horrified, their favorite victors, their fashion icons. Being thrown back in, it's brutal. But because the whole thing is framed as tradition, they process that horror as tragedy, not injustice. It's awful, but it's the law. Then you have the ones who treat it as heightened entertainment. Higher stakes, all-stars season, more drama. Both reactions serve Snow. One normalizes the cruelty, the other ratings boosts it. In the districts, it's different. You get outrage, despair, the sense that the promise of winning has been shattered. But you also get confusion. If this really was in the original rules, then maybe Katniss did force the Capitol's hand. Maybe her defiance in the berries scene broke something fundamental. And this is the price. That's the propaganda trick. They turn her into both the symbol of hope and the supposed reason your aging Victor aunt is being reaped again. And here's the final, terrifying question. If you're watching this from inside Panem, how would you ever prove that card was fake? You never saw it before Snow opened the box. You don't know who wrote it, who stored it, who swapped it. The entire ritual is engineered so you can't challenge it. Which means, if Snow wanted a custom-made death warrant for Katniss, this is the perfect delivery system. But how far does that customization really go? Book versus movie, how adaptation choices support or undercut the theory. So to answer that, we have to ask, does the story itself think the Quell is rigged, or is that just Katniss being paranoid? This is where we talk about book versus movie, because they tilt you in slightly different directions. On the page, the card reveal is almost claustrophobic. You're trapped inside Katniss's head. She's clocking Coin's uprising rumors, Snow's visit to her house, the unrest in every district. When Haymitch reads the rule about reaping from existing victors, her brain doesn't go, wow, what a shocking twist. It goes, of course, it's me. The game's never ended. They just changed costumes. But in the movie, the camera doesn't live in Katniss. It lives on Snow. At face value, you're watching a grand capital ritual. The ornate box, the velvet card, the telecast. Yet the edit keeps cutting back to his face in these tight, almost uncomfortable close-ups. Is that reverence for tradition, or is the film quietly asking you to notice how hard he's selling this? Here's the real question. How much agency does Snow seem to have over that card? In the book, the wording is presented as fixed history, but we mostly get Katniss's reaction, not a legal briefing. There is a lot to uncover here, but the text leaves enough ambiguity that Haymitch can plausibly mutter about the Capitol changing the rules when it suits them without anyone needing proof. The film tweaks that. By centering Snow as the sole presenter, alone with the box and the cameras, it accidentally makes him look more in control. No archivists, no witnesses, no counsel. Just the president, the card, and a nation who has to trust his promise that this was written 75 years ago. That part matters, because visually, the Quell stops feeling like sacred law and starts feeling like a one-man performance. Watch how long the movie lingers on the box being opened. The careful untying of the ribbon, the slow unfolding of the card. You can read that as reinforcing the holiness of the ritual, or as overcompensation. The more Snow insists, this is old and unchangeable, the more your brain goes, so why are you trying so hard? That's a pattern interrupt built right into the cinematography. Then we hit the arena. On the page, the Jabberjays are explicitly personal. Katniss hears Prim, Gale, Finnick hears Annie. She realizes the Capitol has been harvesting their most private screams. She already feels hunted, so this just confirms the relationship between her and Snow as predator and prey. On screen, the sequence is shorter and louder, but the focus stays tight on Katniss's face as she breaks. The sound design leans into her specific terror, not just generic horror. It's less, wow, what a scary mutt, and more, Snow knows your family's voices. That pushes the Quell from random cruelty toward targeted psychological warfare. So when you combine the book's explicit interior monologue, Katniss convinced she's the target, with the film's emphasis on Snow's solitary performance and Plutarch's quiet scheming around him, you actually get a stronger rigged Quell reading than either medium alone. The text gives you the suspicion, the movie gives you the mechanics. But if Snow might be faking a 75-year-old mandate on live TV, the next problem is scale. Did he only rig the rule, or did he help rig the arena itself? If Katniss never volunteered, what would the 75th Quell have been? Or did he help rig the arena itself? To answer that, we have to pull the whole thing out by the roots and ask a weirder question. What if there was never a Katniss to rig it around? Imagine the reaping in District 12 plays out the way it's supposed to. Prem's name is called. Katniss stays frozen. No dramatic "I volunteer," no Mockingjay pin on camera, no berry stunt a year later because some totally different tribute wins the 74th games in a totally ordinary way. So in that timeline, what does the 75th Quarter Quell even look like? At face value, the Capitol tells you the Quell cards were written decades ago to commemorate the Dark Days. Every 25 years, a special horror with a moral. But here's the real question. Without a Mockingjay figure, why on earth would Snow cash in his biggest symbolic event on a victor-only twist? What lesson is that supposed to send, if no one has broken the rules yet? Remember, victors are the Capitol's favorite relationship. They're proof the games work. They stand in their glittering suits and say, the system is brutal, but it's fair, and if you're strong enough, you can survive. In a world where the 74th ends with one clean winner, that promise still holds. So why suddenly turn around and tell every district, actually, your champions are back on the menu? There is a lot to uncover here. If the Quell were truly pre-written, the twist would probably target the districts Snow already hates. Maybe a Quell where only tributes from historically rebellious districts are reaped. Maybe a twist where District 13's destruction is replayed as an in-arena scenario to remind everyone what happens when you step out of line. Or, going darker, this is where we talk about involving Capitol citizens. Imagine every district forced to watch as one Capitol teenager is thrown in with their tributes, a living reminder that the Capitol can suffer too, but only when it chooses. Those alternatives actually serve clear political reasons. They punish specific unrest, or they recenter fear on the Capitol's power. A victor-only Quell, without Katniss, does almost the opposite. It undermines Snow's own investment in the games as a career path. It scares off volunteers. It tells every ambitious family that winning doesn't mean safety, only a longer, more televised death sentence. That part matters, because Snow is careful. He weaponizes hope. He doesn't nuke it from orbit for fun. So a rule that destroys the value of being a victor only makes sense if the value has already been corrupted. Katniss and Peter's dual victory turns winner into symbol of rebellion. The 75th Quell, reaping from existing victors, suddenly reads as a custom patch to delete that glitch. In other words, the twist feels less like a timeless moral and more like a hotfix pushed after the 74th games crashed the system. And once you see it that way, you start to wonder, if the rule was tailored to Katniss, how much of the arena was. 2. The arena as character study, mapping every horror to Katniss's psyche. Once you start asking how much of the rule was tailored to Katniss, you have to ask how much of the arena was. 2. Because the 75th doesn't just try to kill bodies, it dissects personalities. At face value, the clock arena is a fun little sadist's puzzle. Every wedge has a gimmick. But here's the real question. Why these gimmicks? Why blood rain, poison fog, mutation monkeys, a tidal wave, and those jabberjays, all on repeat, all on schedule? Each one goes after a different axis of human vulnerability: your body, your mind, your relationships, your sense of time, your ability to trust your own senses. Take the poisoned fog. This is where we talk about Katniss as a physical survivor. She's the girl who fed her district, who hunted through pain and hunger and cold. The fog doesn't just hurt. It strips away control over your own body, layer by layer, until even movement is betrayal. That part matters because we watch Katniss forced to drag Peter and Mags through it, her protective instinct colliding with the hard limit of her strength. Save Peter and risk all of them dying slowly. Drop someone and live with that choice forever. The arena is literally weaponizing her need to keep other people alive. Then the monkeys. Any victor will tell you the games are about numbers, odds, sponsors, kill counts. The mutation monkeys twist that math into terror. You're surrounded, outnumbered, attacked from every angle. For Katniss, whose worst memories are being a tiny kid with no power, watching her father die, watching Rue die while the whole capital stares, the fear isn't just death. It's being swarmed by a world she can't possibly fight off. When they go for Peter and Wyress, the monkeys force her into that Rue dilemma again. Whose life do you reach for when you only have one arrow, 1 second, oneself? The blood rain and tidal wave hit a different nerve. They're not intimate. They're overwhelming. You can't negotiate with a wall of water. You can't reason with a sky that bleeds. They attack the idea that if you're clever enough, fast enough, you can hack the system. For someone whose entire relationship to the games has been outthink the capital just enough to survive, that's a direct assault on hope. And over all of this, the clock keeps turning. The horrors don't just happen once. They're scheduled. Predictable. That sounds helpful until you realize what Snow is really buying: repetition. Katniss can't just endure trauma and move on. She has to anticipate it, narrate it to the audience with every flinch, then relive it at the exact same time tomorrow. We're going to cover the Jabberjays more deeply, but notice how the pattern works even before that. The arena trains you to dread the hour hand. So why does this feel so specifically pointed? Any tribute would suffer here. Absolutely. But when you map the wedges against Katniss's known fault lines, her protected instinct, her fear of being outnumbered, her guilt over who she couldn't save, the psychological pressure lines up a little too well to be random. And once you see that, you have to wonder, if the arena is a character study of Katniss, who exactly wrote the script? Snow's nervous tells, reading the president's performance. If the arena looks tailored to Katniss, then you have to turn the camera around and ask, what's going on with the man behind it? Because Snow isn't just designing a games, he's performing a role. And here's the real question. Does his performance ever slip enough to show that the Quarter Quell isn't the calm, historic tradition he claims it is? This is where we talk about that private visit to Katniss's new house in Victor's village. Snow doesn't summon her to the capital. He walks straight into District 12, into her living room, and starts talking about the unrest in the districts as if it's her personal fault. He threatens her mother and Prim. He invokes Gale's whipping as a preview of what rebellion will cost, and he makes it very clear, the problem is not abstract. It's her. That part matters because Snow usually rules through distance. He's a white rose on a screen, not a man on your sofa. So why break that pattern now? Why get that close to a 17-year-old Victor from a coal district? At face value, you could say he's just emphasizing the stakes. But we're going to cover the deeper reason. By the time he knocks on that door, he's already off balance. Normally the game system handles trouble automatically. A rebellious district gets a few extra peacekeepers. A difficult victor gets silenced with addiction, parties, or quiet threats. He does not personally negotiate with tributes. That's why his direct confrontation is a nervous tell. It's overkill. It's the president of Panem doing the job a head peacekeeper or a propaganda team should be doing. You can feel the desperation in the way he keeps repeating the same demand. Convince them you're in love, restore their hope, make the story safe again. If he believed the system could absorb Katniss on its own, he wouldn't need to secure her performance face to face. Watch him again during the third Quarter Quell announcement. Snow sits in that ornate chair, holding the sealed card, and he leans hard on the ritual, the history lesson, the reminder that these rules were written long ago, the solemn promise that even the president is bound by them. Why overemphasize the legality unless he's worried someone will question it? His voice is controlled, but his whole act screams, "Don't blame me, blame the card." There is a lot to uncover here if you treat that insistence as a man trying to spread responsibility before the blowback hits. Later, in his meetings with Plutarch and the game makers, the mask slips even more. He doesn't say, "Let the arena take its course." He says, in essence, Katniss Everdeen must die in the arena. No rescue, no loopholes, no repeat of the berry stunt. He frames the Quell as his last best chance to end the Mockingjay before the districts fully commit to open revolt. If this were truly just an old Quell rule finally coming due, why is he micromanaging one girl's death with this level of intensity? And that's the tell. His obsession betrays him. You don't push this hard on something that's supposedly inevitable. Which raises one more dangerous question. If Snow is this nervous about the optics, what does that say about the card he's waving in our faces? District optics. How the Quell plays in 1, 2, 4 versus 12. So when Snow waves that card and pretends this is all destiny, you have to ask, destiny for who? Because the way this Quell lands in each district tells you exactly who it's really aimed at. Start with the career districts. 1, 2, 4. These are places where the games are the sport, the spectacle, the unofficial curriculum. Kids train. Families brag about bloodlines of victors, statues, murals, names on schools. So when they hear only existing victors will be reaped, at face value it almost scans as an all-star season. The heroes are going back in. The arena is suddenly a Hall of Fame deathmatch. Is it horrifying? Absolutely. But the horror is cushioned by pride. District 2 can tell itself, our champions are the strongest. They'll win again. District 1 frames it as a luxury showdown of the elite. District 4, they've got Finnick Odair. The capital has spent years turning him into a myth. So for them, the Quell can initially feel less like a targeted punishment and more like a brutal high-tier tournament their side is favored to win. Now jump to 12. This is where we talk about what happens when you have almost no victors at all. No training academies, no culture of volunteering. Haymitch is a drunk in a crumbling house, not a celebrity coach. Katniss and Peter were the statistical glitch, the miracle. The entire district had exactly one modern success story, and then the boy who volunteered to protect her. So when the rule is read out, there's no illusion of an all-star roster. There's only math, 2 names, no backups, no career bench. The Quell doesn't feel random here. It feels personal. It reads as the capital pointing directly at District 12 and saying, "That hope you had? Hand it back." That part matters because 12 is where the Mockingjay story actually started, so stripping their victor away hits the narrative at its source. The mid-tier districts land in a different kind of nightmare. Think 5, 6, 9, 10. They might have 1 or 2 surviving victors, people who've basically become living monuments. Not glamorous careers, but rare proof that someone from their factories or fields can beat the system once. The Quell swoops in and says, actually, no, you don't get to keep them either. For them, it's a double loss. They lose their heroes, and they lose the tiny promise that the games sometimes pay out. It's a reminder that even when you win, the Capitol can repossess the prize whenever it wants. Here's the real question. If Snow just wanted a harder games, why pick a twist that barely dents the career's confidence, but annihilates the psychology of places like 12? The reason is in the optics. Katniss's victory had the greatest symbolic impact, where victory was rarest and hope was most fragile. So he chooses a rule that doesn't just threaten her body, it targets the relationship between her and the people who believed in her the most. There is a lot to uncover here, because once you see that pattern, the arena itself starts to look tailored too. And that's where we're going to cover how the Quell stops being a tradition and starts looking like a custom-built trap. Katniss as audience surrogate. How our POV shapes the theory. And here's where we have to admit something uncomfortable. We only ever walk into that arena holding one person's hand. Katniss's. Everything we know about the Quarter Quell is filtered through a traumatized 17-year-old from the poorest district in Panem. We don't see Snow's full strategy meetings. We don't see Plutarch's secret rebel briefings. We don't see how a random kid in District 4 reacts when the announcement airs. At face value, the whole games revolve around her, because the camera in the book never leaves her shoulder. So here's the real question. How much of this was built to kill me is the Capitol's intent? And how much is narrative gravity pulling everything toward the Mockingjay? When you're trapped in Katniss's point of view, every detail feels personal. The reaping rule hits her. The arena horrors target her fears. Snow's threats are delivered to her doorstep. That part matters because in-universe, Snow really is obsessed with her. But out of universe, Collins is also using her as our lens on a much wider crackdown. Think about how different the Quell might look if you were sitting in someone else's head. If you're Finnick, you've been property of the Capitol since you were 14. You've watched victors die slowly through addiction and exploitation. When the card says, existing pool of victors, you don't necessarily hear Katniss Everdeen. You hear, they're finally coming for all of us. The games become a mass culling of liabilities, not a bespoke hit on one girl from District 12. From Johanna's perspective, this is where we're going to cover rage more than paranoia. She already lost the people she loved because she wouldn't play nice with the Capitol. So when she's thrown back in, her read might be, they're punishing anyone who ever said no, not. All of this is about Katniss. Beatty might see a different pattern again, a test of victors who can still be weaponized, a probability problem, a way for the Capitol to reassert control over the narrative of hope. There is a lot to uncover here, because once you imagine those other internal monologues, the Quell starts to look less like a laser and more like a net, a brutal targeted net around every symbol the Capitol can't fully manage anymore. And yet, even when you correct for that bias, the specifics keep snapping back to Katniss. The wording that guarantees her eligibility, the Jabberjay wedge that weaponizes her relationships, Snow's personal visit to her home, his fixation on her performance with Peter, the roses sent only to her. So the theory doesn't depend on Katniss being a chosen one blessed by fate. It depends on her being, very mundanely, the most dangerous story on television. A poor hunter from District 12 who accidentally turned a rigged games into a public refusal. Snow's problem isn't magic, it's optics. And the Quell is his attempt to solve that problem in front of every screen in Panem. The next step is to ask whether the arena itself cooperates with that plan or quietly betrays it. The rebellion's perspective. Did they need the Quell to be rigged? So if the arena might be quietly betraying Snow, we have to flip the camera for a second. Not to the Capitol audience, to the people trying to burn the whole system down. Here's the real question. Did the rebellion actually need the Quarter Quell to be rigged? Or were they already on a collision course with the Capitol, with or without Snow's historic card? At face value, you could imagine another path. Katniss goes home, unrest simmers. Maybe there's a bombing in District 8. Maybe Plutarch recruits her slowly as a symbol. But would any of that have given them what the Quell gives them in one brutal televised move? A concentrated ring of victors, every camera pointed at one arena, and stakes so personal that every district feels the knife. Think about what doesn't happen without the Quell. You don't get nearly every problematic victor in one place. Beatty, Finnick, Johanna, Wyres, even Haymitch as a potential alternate. You don't get the capital willingly gathering its most dangerous survivors under a single force field. The rebellion can sabotage trains, smuggle weapons, pass messages through Mockingjay songs, but they can't manufacture that roster. Snow does it for them, and he does it because of Katniss. That part matters because the whole twist only makes sense if the capital needs her dead on screen as a lesson. Snow could have disappeared her quietly. Instead, he wraps her in ceremony and calls it justice. In a twisted way, the rebels benefit from that decision. His attempt to erase the Mockingjay creates the perfect conditions to reveal her. You watch Katniss dragged back into the games, and the unspoken message to the districts is clear. There is no safety, no promise, not even for a victor who played by the rules. So how do Plutarch and Coin read that situation? They don't need to stand up and say, by the way, that card is fake. They just need to weaponize the outrage the capital has already created. This is where we talk about opportunism as strategy. The capital announces, your victors are going back. The districts scream, the rebels don't argue with the premise. They ride the wave. Plutarch leans into the spectacle, choreographing alliances, camera moments, the beach scenes, because every second Katniss survives on screen deepens her relationship with the audience. And the extraction plan itself absolutely hinges on the specific architecture of this Quell. The clock arena, the lightning tree, the predictable 12-hour cycles. Beatty's wire isn't just a fun science project, it's the spine of the escape. You can't run that exact plan in a random jungle or a standard cornucopia bloodbath. They adapt to Snow's rigged game rather than designing it from scratch, turning the force field, his control mechanism, into their exit door. So when the arena explodes and the hovercraft from District 13 scoops Katniss out of the sky, you're not just seeing a rescue, you're seeing the Quell reframed as a catalyst. Snow tries to close the Katniss problem with a rigged tradition, and in doing so, he hands the rebels the narrative weapon they've been waiting for. The question now is, was that weapon limited to the arena, or has the capital been quietly building rebel tools into the games for years without realizing it? Was the Quell tradition ever real? A deeper lore autopsy? If the arena can secretly double as a jailbreak for the rebellion, what does that say about the tradition it's built on? The Quarter Quell is sold to you as ancient, sacred, untouchable. But here's the real question. How much of that tradition actually exists outside a capital broadcast and a wooden box we only ever see on TV? Any victor will tell you the games are a story before they're a slaughter, and every story needs a source. For the Quells, that source is entirely capital controlled. The only records we ever hear about are Snow's announcement, the official footage, the carefully worded explanation about a card written decades ago. Where are the district records? Where are the pre-capital historians saying, yes, this was always the plan? They don't exist, because the capital has monopolized the narrative of the dark days and the early games from day one. So this is where we talk about the box itself. At face value, it's this relic, heavy wood, sealed cards, a physical promise that the rules were decided long ago. But who built it? Who authenticated it? The only person we ever see handle it is the current president of the capital. That part matters because if Snow controls the object, he controls the illusion of age. It would be incredibly easy to retroactively invent the box Once a president realized they needed a flexible escalation tool, need to punish a rebellious district? Oh, what a coincidence. The card from 25 years ago says double tributes. Need to break a problematic victor? What do you know? This one says victors go back in. And we already know the capital rewrites history with zero hesitation. District 13 isn't just bombed, it's erased. The Dark Days aren't just a war. They're sanitized into a morality tale where the capital was always justified, always merciful. So why would we suddenly assume they're scrupulously honest about the origin of the Quells? If they can fake an entire district's extinction, forging a few cards in a decorative box is nothing. Maybe the first and second Quells were genuinely pre-written. Maybe they weren't. By the time we reach the 75th, it almost doesn't matter. The tradition is so opaque, so wrapped in myth and one-way propaganda, that Snow can bend it without fear of exposure. Who's going to demand to carbon date the parchment on live television? No district has the power, and every victor is already trapped inside the capital's media machine. So the real power of the Quell isn't its age, it's its perceived age. The belief that this thing is sacred, that it comes from the founders, lets Snow weaponize it against Katniss with minimal pushback. You're not watching a man change the rules in panic. You're watching a man hide behind a story everyone's been trained to revere. And once you see that, you have to ask, if the tradition is that malleable, what else about the games' history has been quietly edited to keep the Mockingjay from ever taking flight? Pattern interrupt. Let's rapid-fire test counter-arguments. So let's slam the brakes for a second. We've been building this slow, ominous case about a custom-made death trap, but here's the real question. What happens if we stress test it? Rapid, no mercy. First counter-argument. The card really was written 75 years ago. It's just a dark coincidence that it targets Katniss. At face value, that sounds reasonable. The games are cruel, the capital is theatrical, so of course one Quell would eventually hit the victors. But step back. Out of infinite possible special twists, the one supposedly chosen decades earlier just happens to require the single girl Snow has personally visited and threatened. That part matters because the wording doesn't just inconvenience her district, it mathematically funnels her back into the arena. You're not dealing with vague symbolism, you're dealing with a rule that might as well say, "Dear District 12, please return your Mockingjay." Second objection, the arena horrors are generic. Anyone would be traumatized by poison fog and blood rain, right? True, but this is where we talk about resonance. The jungle is dense, humid, full of hidden predators. For most capital viewers, it's exotic. For Katniss, who survived by stalking game in the woods, it's an uncanny mirror of her hunting grounds. Then weaponized against her, the Jabberjays don't just scream, they replay Prim, Gale, and her mother in agony. The one victor whose entire relationship to rebellion is tied to protecting specific people is trapped in a loop, where she can't save them. Could that break any tribute? Absolutely. Is it surgically targeted at the girl whose defiance began with berries to save Peter? Also yes. Third pushback. Snow would never risk undermining a core tradition. The Quells are sacred. That's the whole promise. But authoritarian systems break their own rules all the time, as long as they can pretend they didn't. The capital seals the cards, only the president reveals them, and no district gets to audit the archives. That's the perfect setup for quiet forgery. Publicly, Snow is the loyal steward of history. Privately, he's the editor-in-chief of whatever version keeps the games useful. Fourth argument, aren't we overstating Katniss's importance? She's one victor out of many. The problem is, Snow doesn't treat her that way. He goes to District 12 himself. He blames her for unrest. He demands she sell a love story to put the rebellion back to sleep. When that fails, the next Quell just happens to gather every problematic victor in one kill box. We're going to cover more of his strategy later, but you can already see the pattern. He's terrified of her as a symbol, not just as a girl with a bow. So where does that leave the theory? Think of it as a spectrum. Maybe you don't buy a full forgery, but the evidence almost forces you to accept a softer version, that even if the card existed, Snow selectively used and interpreted this ancient tradition to solve one very modern problem: the Mockingjay. And once you frame it that way, the next question is brutal. How many other traditions were quietly bent the second they threatened capital control? Emotional fallout, how the Quell breaks Katniss before it saves her. So, if Snow is quietly bending tradition whenever he needs to, here's the real question. What does that do to the girl trapped in the middle of the performance? Because before the Quarter Quell even starts, Katniss is already living in a mental arena. Any victor will tell you the games don't end when you win. Katniss comes home to a mansion, sure, but she also comes home to nightmares so vivid she can't sleep, to hypervigilance where every twig snap sounds like a cannon. She's hunting at dawn not because she's hungry, but because being in the woods is the only place she can breathe. The reward the capital promised has turned into a surveillance cage, and that part matters because she realizes very quickly that her victory didn't buy safety. It bought responsibility for an entire district's fragile sense of hope. So when Snow shows up in her living room, breath smelling of blood and roses, he's not just threatening her, he's confirming her worst fear. The games are still going. If she can't convince Panem that her berry stunt was about romance instead of rebellion, her family dies. You watch her mental state narrow to one obsessive project: protect Prim, protect Peter, keep the capital calm. There is a lot to uncover here about the relationship between trauma and control. Then the Quarter Quell announcement drops, reaped from the existing pool of victors. In District 12, that means her or Haymitch, and Peter erases even that thin choice by volunteering. Suddenly, she's forced to leave Prim again, but this time with the knowledge that the capital is doing this on purpose. To her, personally. The first time, death was a probability. Now, it feels like a schedule. This is where we talk about the arena itself, because at face value, it's just another clever game maker toy. A clock with timed horrors. But map those horrors onto Katniss. The Jabberjay sector doesn't just play random screams, it weaponizes her exact loved ones' voices, forcing her to hear Prim, Gale, and Peter being tortured. The monkey attack, the blood rain, the poisonous fog, each one strips away another coping mechanism until she's on her knees, hands over her ears, sobbing and begging a bird to stop. And remember, all of this is televised. Snow's not only trying to kill her body, he's trying to broadcast her breakdown. The reason is simple. A shattered Katniss on camera turns the Mockingjay from a symbol of defiance into a cautionary tale. You want to rebel, this is what it does to you. Madness, not freedom. But the irony is brutal. Those same cracks are what later make the Mockingjay feel real to the districts. When Katniss flinches at sudden noises, when she dissociates in front of a camera, you believe her. She's not a polished capital product. She's the cost of their system made visible. The Quell doesn't just try to destroy the symbol, it accidentally forges the only version of that symbol people will trust. And once you see that, you have to ask, was the arena failing? Or was someone else quietly hijacking Snow's plan from the inside? The moment the plan fails, Katniss aims at the sky. So when does that quiet hijack turn into a full-on jailbreak? It happens in one shot, one arrow. A choice that at face value looks almost irrational. We're in the lightning segment of the clock. Beatty has this plan: run the coil of wire from the tree, channel the lightning into the force field, short the arena. You're told it's about killing careers, maybe taking out the most dangerous tributes in one engineered strike. That's the story everyone on Katniss's side is pretending to agree to. But here's the real question. Why does the plan only truly work if one person understands the arena as a system, not just a battlefield? This is where we talk about collision. On one side, you have Snow's design, a domed force field, a perfect televised globe, a lightning tree that hits on schedule so the capital can choreograph suspense. On the other, you have Plutarch's design, the clock layout, the predictable horrors, BT's wire as a primitive hacking cable, and in the middle, you have Katniss, whose entire relationship with the games is built on refusing to play by the script. She doesn't know the rebellion's strategy. That part matters because it means this isn't a cool mastermind moment where she decodes everything. She's half deaf, concussed watching Peter vanish, Finnick screaming her name. BT is on the ground with the wire and a spear. Johanna has just attacked her. If you're Katniss, who do you trust? No one. So instead of finishing BT's supposed plan, she follows the one instinct she's had since day one: aim up. Remember that training center scene? When she fires an arrow into the game maker's roast pig and forces them to look at her. Back then, the rebellion is just a spark. Now, she's literally aiming for the people behind the glass again, only this time there's a force field in the way. She draws the wire to the arrow, waits for the lightning, and shoots the sky. It's the same gesture, scaled up. She's no longer embarrassing the table, she's cracking the dome. Snow builds an arena to be a flawless stage for her execution. Plutarch uses that same arena as a circuit board, and Katniss, who thinks she's just lashing out at the only enemy she can see, becomes the switch that flips the entire system off. The girl on fire turns the sky into shrapnel. There is a lot to uncover here, because this is also the moment the whole theory cashes out. The Quell is over-engineered to trap one victor from one district, but that over-engineering gives her a lightning conductor, a mapped clock, and a fragile glass ceiling. The capital's promise of total control literally arms the rebellion. When the arena explodes, you're not just watching a prison break, you're watching Snow's narrative detonate on live television. But what actually survives that blast? And what exactly was planned to fall? Aftermath in flames. How the failed execution creates the Mockingjay. What survives is the problem, because the arena dies on camera, but Katniss doesn't. And for the Capitol, a failed execution is so much worse than a clean kill. In the smoke of that explosion, you get the split that defines the rest of the story. Katniss is scooped up by a rebel hovercraft carried to the underground skeleton of District 13. Peter is not. He's taken by the Capitol, pulled out of the same wreckage, and turned into a hostage. Snow loses his perfect spectacle, but he gains something he thinks is just as useful: leverage. So what do you do when your death trap turns your target into a survivor again? Here's the real question. How do you sell control after millions of people just watch the sky literally crack? The Capitol's first instinct is denial. Lock down the feeds. Flood the airwaves with edited footage, solemn anchors, and a tidy narrative about a tragic technical failure in the games. At face value, they're trying to say, the system hiccuped, but the system still works. The problem is, the images are already out. There is a lot to uncover here. The visual of the arrow hitting the force field, the lightning blasting through the tree, the arena panels shattering and peeling upward like broken glass. That's burned into every district's memory. You can't unsee victors being airlifted away from a supposedly inescapable arena. Even if the Capitol censors half the footage, enough gets through that people can replay it in their heads. The games, the thing that promised absolute control, suddenly has seams, and the districts don't read that as a glitch. They read it as a message. Someone mapped that clock. Someone timed that lightning. Someone aimed that shot. This is where we talk about interpretation. In District 11, in 8. In the ruins of 12, people aren't saying the arena broke. They're saying the arena was broken. That part matters because it shifts the relationship between citizen and system. If the games can be cracked open, maybe the capital can too. And who's at the center of every retelling? The girl with the bow who brought the ceiling down. Coin and Plutarch understand that instantly. When Katniss wakes up in 13, she's not being welcomed as a traumatized victor. She's being assessed as a broadcast asset. We're going to cover her grief, her fury over Peter, her confusion about the plan. But for them, those are raw materials. They decide to brand her as the Mockingjay because the Quell already did the visual work. The arena, the lightning tree, the arrow punching through the force field. All Coin has to do is wrap that into a uniform and a song. And here's the irony. Without the Quell's specific cruelty, dragging her back, threatening her family, forcing her to stand again in a victor's parade she never wanted, Katniss probably fades into history as a one-time spark. Snow's attempt to erase her doesn't just fail. It authors the myth. The failed execution gives the rebellion a resurrection story, and you can't compete with that on Capitol TV. So where do you go after you've accidentally created a martyr who's still alive? Was the Quarter Quell designed to kill Katniss? Final verdict. So where do you go after you've accidentally created a martyr who's still alive? You stage a sequel that pretends to be tradition, but is really a custom-built execution. The third Quarter Quell isn't just the next games on the calendar, it's the Capitol's do-over. At face value, Snow is just reading a dusty card from a sealed box. This time, the tributes will be reaped from the existing pool of victors. But here's the real question. What are the odds that a pre-written twist just happens to drag the one girl threatening your regime back into the arena the very year you need her gone? There is a lot to uncover here, and it starts with how eerily precise that wording is. Recap the pillars. First, the card itself. The Capitol swears these Quell rules were written decades ago, but only the sitting president ever sees or presents them. That part matters because it gives Snow total control to forge, swap, or discover whichever version best solves his Katniss problem. Second, Snow's obsession is personal and political. He literally shows up in her new house, smells the blood on the system, and tells her the district's unrest is her fault. Third, the arena is a clock that just happens to weaponize Katniss's specific fears and weak spots. Jabberjay's screaming with her sister's voice, toxic fog that punishes slower, less physically dominant victors, a central water ring that neutralizes her hunting advantage. Finally, the propaganda framing sells this as solemn justice, turning the promise of safety for victors into a televised warning. So how strong is the case that this was all designed to kill one girl from District 12? On the pro side, the pattern is brutal. Snow needs Katniss visible, killable, and discredited. A random normal games can't touch her. She's immune from the reaping. The Quell twist solves that in one sentence. The arena then corrals her into emotional breakdowns that read as weakness on Capitol TV, while surrounding her with older, unstable victors whose deaths can be blamed on her presence. But we do have counter-arguments. The text never shows Snow forging the card. Plutarch is secretly working with the rebellion, hijacking the arena design to save, not kill, Katniss. Some of the horrors hit other victors harder than her. The narrative deliberately leaves you room to ask, is this conspiracy or coincidence? Amplified by trauma. This is where we talk about the verdict. The most consistent reading is that Snow either forged, swapped, or selectively chose the 75th Quell twist to force Katniss back into a controllable televisable kill box. Whether the literal cardstock is fake almost doesn't matter. The Quell as implemented is optimized around eliminating her and neutralizing what she represents. So when you reframe the story, the 75th games stop being Hunger Games 2.0. They become the Capitol's final attempt to turn a glitch in their system into a cautionary tale. And the irony is, in trying to erase one symbol, they hand the rebellion the perfect narrative, a rigged tradition, a broken promise, and a victor who refuses to die on schedule. The question then becomes, if the Capitol built the trap, how did the rebels manage to steal the ending? What this changes about rewatching Catching Fire, so when you go back to Catching Fire with this in mind, the whole movie starts playing different. The Quarter Quell isn't just a twist anymore, it's a crime scene. Start with the announcement. At face value, it's Snow honoring a solemn tradition. The president opens a sealed box, reads a card written decades ago. The Capitol mourns. But here's the real question. Why does he look nervous? Why does the camera linger on his fingers, on the card, on that tiny moment before he reads? Rewatch that scene and treat his body language as evidence. The slight pause, the breath, the way his eyes harden right before he says, "From the existing pool of victors." You're not just hearing words, you're watching a man decide to weaponize a ritual against one girl from District 12. There is a lot to uncover here when you line that up with the framing. The box is presented as if it guarantees honesty, but the only person who ever touches the card is the president himself. So when you rewatch, ask, is this ceremony proving transparency, or is it theater designed to make you forget how easy it would be to swap a card? That part matters because it turns the Quell from destiny into premeditation. The games stop feeling random and start feeling personal. Then you hit the arena and things get even sharper. The Jabberjays aren't just a cool horror sequence anymore. They're a targeted psychological strike. On rewatch, notice who gets hit hardest. Katniss, forced to hear Prim and Gale screaming, every promise she's made to protect her family used as ammunition. Was that really just a scary mutt? Or is Plutarch designing a zone that tests whether the Mockingjay can be broken by sound alone? The lightning tree does the same thing. It's the one piece of the clock that rewards her core skill, archery, but only if she becomes a weapon in someone else's plan. This is where we talk about Plutarch. Every smile at the ball, every casual mention of a clock in the control room, shifts tone on a rewatch. You're not just seeing a clever head gam maker, you're watching a double agent playing high-speed chess over Katniss's life and symbolic value. When he lets the Jabberjays run too long, is he pushing her toward collapse or toward a breaking point that justifies extracting her from the arena entirely? The question stops being, is he good or bad, and becomes, how much controlled suffering is he willing to allow to get the rebellion he wants? Viewed through this lens, Collins's political world-building suddenly looks even colder. The games aren't a static punishment, they're an adaptive system. The Capitol tests a threat, then rewrites the rules. Victor's village to manage winners. A rigged quell to erase a symbol. On rewatch, every adjustment feels intentional, a regime tweaking variables in real time to keep hope on a leash. And this theory doesn't have to be a mandate. You can treat it as a tool, watch Catching Fire again, and ask, if Panem is the kind of regime that would rig a sacred tradition to kill one girl, what else in this world stops being coincidence? And more importantly, who inside that system decides when a symbol is too dangerous to live? Your turn in the arena, community theories, and what we missed. So now that we've treated the Quarter Quell as a rigged experiment, we have to hand you the controls for a second. If you were in Snow's office, staring at that little wooden box, What do you think you'd see? A fully forged card? A selectively chosen one from a secret stack? Or a genuinely ancient decree that Snow weaponized at the perfect moment? Here's the real question. Which version actually fits the text and the movies best for you? At face value, the capital tells you these cards were written decades in advance. But we only ever see one person open them, one president, one camera angle, one, oops, what a coincidence, Katniss has to go back in. Do you buy that? Or do you think the tradition is real, but Snow swapped the original card off-screen and hoped no one in any district would ever know the difference? This is where we talk about receipts. If you think the card was forged or swapped, what exact moment sells it for you? Is it Snow's nervousness in Katniss's house at the start of Catching Fire? His line about convincing people in the districts? The way the announcement cuts to victors' faces, who already look suspicious, as if this isn't the first time the capital has bent a rule? Point to the shot, the line, the reaction that made you go, yeah, no, this was custom built for one girl with a Mockingjay pin. On the flip side, what scenes push you toward the ancient but opportunistically used theory? Maybe you read the wording of the third Quarter Quell as too formal, too old-fashioned for Snow to have drafted overnight. Maybe the reason it targets victors is that Panem has always feared what happens when too many traumatized winners pile up in victors' villages. If you think the card is real, what moments in the books or the films make that feel unavoidable rather than convenient? And then, zoom out. How do you think other districts interpreted this quell? Career districts might see it as a rigged promotion exam, prove you're the best of the best, or die. District 11, after Ruined Thresh, might read it as punishment for ever daring to show public grief. Do you have a headcanon about a specific victor in 2, 4, or 7 and how their district's relationship to the games shifted the second that card was read? There is a lot to uncover here in terms of how hope curdles into resignation or open rage. If your brain already has red string on the wall, this channel is basically your victor's village. Bring your corrections, your lore deep dives, your trauma charts. If we missed a line in the book where Plutarch's watch, Finnick's stories, or even Haymitch's reaction quietly confirms or destroys this theory, put it on the table. That part matters because future videos are going to build on what you surface here, especially when we're going to cover how District 13 weaponizes the very Mockingjay image the failed Quell accidentally finished forging. Because if the 75th games were Snow's attempt at a televised execution, the next step is asking who stole his broadcast and turned it into a recruitment ad. Closing the loop, subscribe before the next Quarter Quell, so when you zoom out, the third Quarter Quell stops feeling like an ancient ritual and starts reading as a custom-built execution order that misfired. At face value, it's this solemn centennial twist written on a card 75 years ago. But here's the real question. Who actually benefited from reaping only existing victors? Besides a president desperate to get one girl from District 12 back in the arena, we've spent this whole breakdown tracing that relationship between tradition and targeted violence. Snow has a political problem after the 74th games, a victor who embodies a story he can't control. The reason the Quell feels so personal is because it is. The wording of the card, the timing, the arena built to attack Katniss's specific fears and skills, there is a lot to uncover here, and we've pulled on as many threads as we can in one sitting. If you've been here before, thank you for surviving another mental trip into the arena with me. You know the drill. We take one in-universe index card, and suddenly we're 100+ minutes deep into constitutional law for murder sports. If you're new, and you made it all the way through a feature-length dissection of one sealed envelope, welcome to the Victor's Village corner of the fandom. This is where we talk about why the games work on people, not just what happens on screen. So, if you want more long-form, Victor's village-style dissections of Hunger Games politics, psychology, and world-building, this is your moment. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next capital scandal we unearth. Drop a like if this theory gave you a new reason to side-eye Snow's traditions, and share it with that one friend who still insists the card had to be real because the Capitol said so. Do you really want to take the Capitol at its word after everything we've just mapped out? Because we're not done. Next, we're going to cover how Snow got here in the first place, his rise from scholarship boy in the Capitol to the architect of terror who thinks weaponized hope is good governance. After that, I want to do a full Plutarch character study. Was he a savior, a user, or just a better storyteller than Snow? And then we have to talk about District 13's propaganda machine and how their rebel broadcasts quietly mirror the Capitol's own tricks more than anyone wants to admit. The through line in all of that is simple. In Panem, stories are weapons. Snow tried to turn the third Quarter Quell into a televised execution that would erase the Mockingjay and scare every district back into line. Instead, he handed the rebellion a martyr, a symbol, and a narrative they could replay on every illegal screen. By spending this video pulling apart his script, we're doing the same thing the rebels did, stealing his story and turning it against him. So stay sharp, stay curious, and I'll see you before the next Quarter Quell.